And welcome to the Pledge for Success.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Pledge for Success Engaging Diverse Asset Managers webinar. My name is Stephanie Magency. I'm the Senior Director for Private Philanthropy here at the Council, and I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator for today's program. Thank you for choosing to spend some of your afternoon with us. Before we get started, I'd like to share some housekeeping matters. I will pause for just a few seconds for you all to review the housekeeping slide shown now on screen. One very important additional housekeeping note, all participants are on mute throughout the call. However, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. Feel free to ask questions of the speakers at any time by typing your text in the Q&A or chat box as shown on the right-hand side of the housekeeping items slide. We'll try to get your questions in throughout the webinar and definitely address them at the end of the webinar. If by chance you need to leave the call or get disconnected, please hang up, close out of GoToWebinar completely, and follow the instructions you used originally to rejoin the discussion. And lastly, the call is being recorded today in its entirety. The playback link along with the slide deck will be sent to you and will be available on the Council's website. We are very happy today to be partnering with the Association of Black Foundation Executives, AFFE, for this webinar and other learning activities to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout all domains of the sector. The goal of today's webinar is to provide both strategic and tactical information and resources to enable foundations to assess what actions you need to take to engage diverse asset managers. We are grateful to our education partner for the 2016 Endowments and Finance Summit, the TIAA Institute, for their generous support of today's webinar and the summit. We have assembled a virtual dream team to provide thought leadership on today's webinar. Their detailed bios can be found on the Council website, but I'd like to share just a bit about each of them. Erica Seth Davies is the Vice President of External Affairs at AFFE. In her role, she leads their development, membership, marketing, and communications efforts, in addition to special projects such as Leverage the Trust, an AFFE campaign to identify and engage 100 Black Foundation trustees. Bert Foos, with the Senior Vice President of Investments, is responsible for oversight and administration of Silicon Valley Community Foundation's $6.5 billion of investment and charitable trust assets. Bert and his team work closely with the Foundation's investment committee, advisors, and investment managers to invest and protect their assets across numerous portfolios. Elaine Orr, also at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, is their Director of Investments, and she supports the investment committee and the board in the stewardship of the Foundation's charitable capital. She partners with donors, nonprofits, and their investment advisors in framing investment policies and implementing asset allocation. She also leads the management and oversight of the individually managed fund program at the Foundation. And our final speaker is Jason Lehman. Jason is the founder of Lenox Park Solutions and oversees all aspects of the firm's advisory business. Lenox Park is working with several Foundation clients and some council members. Before founding Lenox Park, Jason was a director in Merrill Lynch's fixed income structured credit group in New York. To help our speakers better understand who is on the webinar and to help the council get a sense of who's interested in this topic, we'll begin today with just a few polling questions. You'll see the first question on the screen now. What type of foundation do you work for? And please record your response. Again, we're just gathering a little information about who is interested in this topic and who's on the phone today. So just take one more second to record your response, and we have a good number of community foundations on the call and independent foundations. Next, let's ask and find out, are any of you currently engaging diverse asset managers? And by diverse asset managers, we mean women and/or ethnic and racial minorities. Please take a moment to respond to this question. And we will close that question now. And most of you are not. Okay. Our next question, how would you rate your foundation's state of readiness for engaging diverse managers? With 1 being resistant to the change, all the way through to 5, which means a strategy has been or is being implemented. You're at a high state of readiness. Please take a moment to vote. And let's move to our next question, which is, and most of you are thinking about it. That's good, but have had some preliminary discussions. We'll be able to hopefully help you a little further along with today's webinar. Our next to last question, which of the following would be helpful for you to increase your engagement or begin your engagement with diverse managers? Perhaps you need more information to help make the case internally. Maybe it'd be great to identify diverse managers. Review some case studies of other foundations' experience or some other helpful thing. Okay. Let's see what we have. Wonderful. We'll be able to do some of that today on the call. This is great. Nice to know we are moving in the right direction and are thinking about what we should cover. And lastly, we know that some of you have multiple persons participating in your office on the webinar. Can you just take a quick look at this? And if there are others in your office participating, would you please let us know how many are with you in the room? And thank you for taking time to answer the polling questions. That'll be very helpful for the council and for our speakers on the webinar today. We'll begin by hearing from Erica Davies, the VP for External Affairs at AFSCME. Erica?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you everyone for being on the call this afternoon. Based on the feedback from the polling questions, I think we are going to be able to meet our audience where they are, address probably some of the different questions or concerns or issues of the different types of foundations, and also get some of the information to everyone regarding how to make the case, where to identify managers, and how to move this work forward. So hopefully we can get all that accomplished in the next few minutes, roughly 45 minutes now. I will say that I am pleasantly surprised by the number of participants who are actually engaging diverse firms, and am very encouraged by the number or the percentage of those who are in preliminary discussions and interested, obviously, in pursuing if they're on the call. So I will just frame a little bit about AFSCME's work in this space, talk just a bit about making the case, to share a little bit of information about what we know is going on in the field in terms of what are some of the barriers to opportunity, what we're learning, some potential resources, and then a quick set of recommendations for moving to increase opportunities for engaging minority and women-owned firms. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the making the case and why diverse managers, we sort of look to these four things that are, we believe, are pretty strong reasons for moving this particular agenda. Alpha, obviously everyone is seeking performance, and diverse asset management firms and women-owned asset management firms are more than capable of performing, and in some cases outperforming their larger majority peers. For the most part, smaller firms are found in this space, or these firms are found in the smaller space of managers. So they're very often a little bit more nimble and can engage with their clients on a much closer basis. Diversification. I mean, everyone knows that this is one of the most important components of reaching long-range financial goals while minimizing risk. We also talk about diversification in terms of asset class, but this also is a diversification in manager size and approach that can help with that as well. Along with diversification, we talk about diversity. There have been countless studies. I think McKinsey released one last year that just show how diversity drives innovation and it improves performance. When you have diversity of thought, background, perspectives, et cetera, that you're much more likely to get a better return. And I think one of their studies most recently said that companies, for example, in top quartile for gender or racial ethnic diversity are more likely to have financial returns above their national industry medians. And then finally, it's a capacity building opportunity. It creates competition, quite frankly, in the financial services field. You're building greater opportunity for the future when investing in and supporting these firms through business opportunities. Next slide. So why does it matter for AFSCME, and why does it matter for our field in particular? This body of work is under AFSCME's advocacy. I don't know how many people know who we are, but we're a 45-year-old affinity group in the field of philanthropy, the first recognized by the Council on Foundations. And so diversity is very important to us. It's in our DNA. And so we've spent the last 45 years advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field and a whole range of places in terms of grant-making dollars, leadership pipelines, ensuring that C-suite is diverse, trustees, et cetera. And this was just another area of foundation operations where we just did not see progress, really didn't even see movement at all. So when we picked this work up in 2011, we saw this as being crucial to aligning with a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's happening in the field of philanthropy. And quite frankly, it aligns with a lot of the missions and the values of a number of foundations. I know certainly those that are in our membership, but many, countless foundations across the field that believe in and value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and simply have not applied that particular lens to their financial services, to their endowments, to the way that they actually operate outside of their grant making and possibly hiring. So this is yet another way of applying that lens to your work. We see this as a wealth building opportunity. Although families of color might be moving into the majority in this country, the average wealth of white families is 6 times higher than that of Hispanic and 7 times higher that of black families. So there's a huge disparity that has to be addressed for the future of our country. So this is one of those ways of beginning to address that by, one, increasing the diversity in financial services, but then also ensuring that those businesses and those opportunities grow. Leadership pipelines in 2 aspects. One, within the financial services industry, very often women and people of color hire other women and people of color within their firms. So it creates the opportunity for the next generation of firms to be launched. And again, goes back to creating those wealth building opportunities through hiring and again through future business development. But it also helps to develop leadership pipelines in our sector. We're often looking for trustees and committee members who are diverse and who bring a diverse set of experience to the table. This is a ready-made source of potential trustees for community and independent foundations, and even family foundations. And also some leaders within the sector. There is a glaring lack of diversity in terms of CFO and investment officers across the country, but then in our sector in particular. So yet another source for opportunity. And finally, we view this through the lens of philanthropy, and firms, excuse me, of color who are led by, we've studied a number of African American owned firms, and they have leveraged over $50 billion in philanthropic support in their country and in their community. So again, this is just another way of leveraging the work of philanthropy to do better in communities. And so we see this as just another opportunity to do that by building, again, the wealth and the philanthropic leverage of firms of color and women-owned firms. I think that might be of particular interest to some of our community foundation partners who are on the phone as well, who need to look to the next generation of their own donors. So building wealth wherever possible through the business practices of our foundations is a way of doing that also. Next slide. So now I'm just going to talk briefly about sort of what we've learned in the field specifically, some of the barriers, and I won't spend too much time on that, but just wanted to lift them up and possibly see some of your own challenges reflected in those, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're learning, some resources, and again, those recommendations before passing. So what we're learning, I'm sorry, next slide, please. Barriers first, sorry. So I think probably everyone at some point in time has sort of thought about, considered these, that very often the policies and practices that govern endowment management simply prevent connection to qualified minority managers. If there is not intention in this, then it generally doesn't happen organically. There's a misperception and among consultants of simply higher risk. That there's higher investment risk and or higher institutional risk of investing with these firms, and that's just not the case. Very often there's this notion of limited access to minority investment talent just across the different asset classes. Again, this goes to intention. If you're not looking intentionally, if this is a part of your process, then you're simply not going to stumble upon it, given the way networks play into the identification and selection of managers. I mentioned earlier that very often these firms are found in the emerging or the smaller manager space, which means that they will have limited marketing dollars. So the spaces and the places where we convene and show up are very often out of reach for some of these firms. So obviously there's the issue of long-term relationships and how to move past those. But there are two areas that were highlighted in a recent report that was released by the Silicon Valley Community Foundation through APSI, Investment Manager Diversity, the Hardest Taboo to Break. It really just went to the core, I believe, the core of what we see in this space, and that's implicit bias and consultants as gatekeepers. Just the implicit bias that either women or people of color are unable to manage money in the same way that white males can, and that's simply a matter of who's had the opportunity to do it. But by all accounts, the numbers, they dismantle that. And then also consulting and the challenges of working with consultants or third parties to help bring this into our foundations has been a challenge as well, a pretty significant barrier. Next slide. As this particular webinar would attest, there is an appetite out here, so it's encouraging. As we have, and we as Bert and I have gone to a number of foundation convenings from SAOG to the Council of Foundations Community Foundations Conference and last year's Financial Services and Endowment Conference, and there is an appetite out there to learn more about this, to reflect on policies and practices, to find where managers exist. So again, that's encouraging, and I think the more that we come together around the topic, that we'll build something of a movement in the field around this. We're learning that when this happens, that people are using the facts, and they're starting with the facts, they're using data. So there's the data around, okay, well, what do our current managers look like? Is there any diversity there? What is the performance of minority-owned firms in different asset classes? Just starting there will help bring everyone to an understanding of what your baseline is and where you want to be. And I think Bert and Elaine can really speak to the importance of data with internally and then looking externally to support that as well. Engaging in respectful conversations in safe spaces have really moved this as well. Referring to the implicit bias statement that I made earlier, conversations about diversity, about race, about gender can be very difficult for people, and when in a safe space, and this very often happens at the board level, but also at the staff level, if people can ask the questions and get candid answers, that's important to dismantling a lot of the challenges that we found around getting more minority and women-owned firms just to the table so that they can compete with their peers. Inequities are systemic, but implicit bias affects individual decision-making. This goes to safe space as well. It's been really important when these conversations happen that people recognize what is systemic and what is an individual bias. A systemic issue, an example of that is our policies don't prioritize diversity in manager selection. Or one of our practices is that we don't look at firms that have that are younger than 10 years, that have less than a 10 or 15-year track record. Those types of things are systemic barriers that just simply will keep out a number of minority and women-owned firms. I think the oldest firm is probably 25, if not 30 years, and there may be 2 of those that are black-owned firms, for example. So if you have a barrier like track record, that may be the track record for the firm, but not the manager himself or herself, those types of systemic barriers won't even bring those firms into your screen. So looking at the differences between what's the systemic issue versus what is actually implicit bias. Just running through the rest of these pretty quickly, knowing who the allies are within your organization on the board and outside in the field becomes very important. Engaging colleagues and peers that have the greatest level of influence. It may be an investment committee chair that needs to be turned on this issue, or it just might be a staff member that needs additional information. Just kind of finding what those levers are internally to help to move that. And it's got to be someone's job. Someone has to be focused on this and willing to go the extra mile and keep it on the table. And then we've got to continuously cultivate new leadership around the work. One of the things that Bert and I always joke about is we often get asked to participate in a number of panels, and we realize that there's not a very deep bench in our field for others that we can lift up as potential speakers, and we've got to continue to build some leadership around this. Next slide. Bert will talk about some more later, and I'll address a few in the next slide, but there are a number of resources I know that AFI has put out into the field. Our first paper on this was Foundation Investment Management Practices, Thoughts and Alpha and Access to the Field. That goes deeper into some of the barriers and other things that can be done to address them. I mentioned investment manager diversity, the hardest taboo to break. That was written by Dr. Emmett Carson from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. He wrote about his own experience as a 20-year veteran leading foundations, community foundations in particular, and this being the most difficult and most challenging area for him to develop a diversity agenda around. But then he also brought into this paper Colonial Consulting to talk about their perspective and the challenges, but the opportunity that was created when Silicon Valley Community Foundation decided that they were prioritizing a diversity of managers to align with their mission and their values. We've also produced Who Manages the Money, which is, was done in partnership with Fairman White of Progress Investment Management Company, and looks at the Kellogg Foundation as a specific case study and how their decision, again, to align with their mission and their intention to be an anti-racist organization, sort of had to go through the entire organization, not just in terms of their grant making, but their hiring and their business practices. So that's a really important paper as well that just, again, goes in on one particular foundation in their process, but also lists up other models that foundations can consider. And it's not here, but I believe it is on the COF website. I know we have it, is Philanthropy's Next Hurdle, Diverse Asset Managers, and that was released last year at the COF Financial Services and Endowment Conference as well. Stephanie, I guess we can make that available for folks afterwards. Next slide. So, excuse me, not wanting people to go without having some either action items or some information that they can use. And some of this I touched on already in terms of recommendations for increasing opportunity. You've got to be intentional and you've got to be explicit. That's the bottom line. Again, this does not happen organically, and it doesn't happen just because we put it out there in the universe. There has to be very deliberate action if you want to engage diverse asset managers. Connecting this effort to the performance appraisal for either your staff or your consultants so that there is an accountability process in place. Exploring the platforms that offer exposure to minority and women-owned firms. There are a lot of fund-of-funds and manager-of-manager platforms out here that have been responding to the demand in the public pension space, but have the capacity and actually have a depth in terms of where those managers are and how they're performing across asset classes. Bert will talk a little bit more about this as well, but monitoring relationships with consultants to ensure that their process adheres to what your goals and your intentions are. Getting to know the organizations that support minority and women-owned managers. There are a lot out here. Similar to the field of philanthropy, there are affinity groups in the financial services industry. There's the Association of Asian American Investment Managers. There's the National Association of Securities Professionals. NAIC is the National Association of Investment Companies. New America Alliance, 100 Women Hedge Funds, and I believe there are a number of others that, again, have conferences, webinars, different types of convenings that you can either attend, you can be a speaker, you can just get to know them because they know within their respective communities who a number of those firms are. And encouraging collaborative business models and partnerships between traditional consulting firms, managers, and, again, fund-of-funds or manager-of-manager platforms where you're going to get the depth in this space to be able to reach others. So with that, I'm actually going to wrap up my portion of this. And we'll be shifting into a conversation or presentation from Bert Joyce and Elaine Orr of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. This foundation has been a tremendous leader on this, and Bert and Elaine both have been willing to meet with colleagues, come with me to different events. They've produced a report to sort of put themselves out there and be supportive of ASCI, as we hope to be supportive of them, but also, again, making sure that the field has a resource. They're the best case study as well that I've engaged with. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Bert, Joyce, and Elaine to talk a little bit about Silicon Valley, how they've decided to move on this, what their timing was, what their challenges were, et cetera, et cetera. So I will turn it over now to Bert.
Great. Thank you, Erica. And greetings to those on the phone. And thank you to the Council on Foundations for hosting this webinar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our path at Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the path we've taken and where we're going, and share some of the results that we've published and committed to being transparent about our journey. Then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Elaine to talk a little bit more about the managers and our interaction with the consultants and her experience. So next slide, please. Great. So this is a busy slide, but it's a timeline, and I want to draw some key points here. First, if you look at the very beginning, it starts with the CEO. We started this path about 5 years ago when our CEO, some of you may recall, our history is the result of a merger. So for the first couple of years after our merger, there was a lot of attention, of course, to merging, creating the culture, and creating the systems and infrastructure. At about 2011, we turned our attention to the investment committee and investment manager roster, and noticing that our board was diverse, our staff was diverse, our grantees were diverse, our suppliers were diverse, but our investment manager roster was not. And looking at our core values of diversity and inclusion, as well as transparency and accountability, The CEO spoke with both the board and the staff and the investment committee about the importance of those values in our work and the importance of diversity in everything we do, and challenged our investment consultant to help address the lack of diversity in the investment manager lineup. And that was really the start of a couple of years of education, both on the staff's part, the investment committee's part, and the consultant's part. We started reaching out, engaging with other like-minded investors in the field who were ahead of us, such as the Kellogg Foundation or the Texas Teachers Retirement System and others. We started attending conferences. We were fortunate enough that our investment committee chair, Thurman White, CEO of Progress Investment Management, an emerging manager platform, was very helpful with introductions and suggestions on how to deepen our engagement and widen our circle of connections. So we asked our consultant to report annually 3 key metrics of all the managers they meet with, what portion were women or minority managers, of all the managers they're recommending, what was the proportion, and of all the managers their clients are hiring, what was the proportion. And in the first year, 2013, when Colonial made their first report, they realized that they too have some work to do and were not quite as far along in the diversity of the managers that they were sourcing that they had hoped. So that also, during this time, our CEO and the managing director at Colonial Consulting co-authored a paper that Erica referred to and is available on the AFP website or our website, and I highly encourage those of you who want to get more history out of this, to discuss the challenges that they both faced from the gatekeeper perspective as a consultant and a CEO of an organization, and why those challenges may exist. Soon after that was published, there was a number of other studies published, and this generated much greater interest and a lot more conference requests for speaking, which got us out there and Erica out there, as Erica mentioned, and Elaine and others. And this all then kept widening the circle and giving us more introductions. And you can see on the timeline towards the end there, we've been hiring managers, Ariel, Garcia Hamilton, et cetera, and have been making progress there. One important point, though, is that I want to point out is that our end game here, and we feel like we're just still at the very beginning of a long journey here. Our goal here was not to add language to our policy or to have the board check it off as something that was completed. It was to really live and incorporate in our daily activities a truly inclusive sourcing of diverse managers who are qualified and skilled to be in our portfolios. And our measure of when we're done is not a measure of assets or a number of managers. It's when we feel confident that those who we work with to source managers, that process is inclusive, and that qualified, high-performing, skilled managers who happen to be women or people of color are included in that process. Next slide. So just a few things. Our definition of minority and women managers is 51% or more ownership. I think different practitioners in the field have different definitions, but this was one that is a standard that you'll see in procurement, government procurement, and in other areas. So we started there. We also, though, are pay attention to those that are 50-50 owned or have significant control or significant leadership and portfolio management. And we'll probably be exploring this definition as we move forward. Also wanted to differentiate that emerging managers is also a definition that you'll hear a lot, which generally refers to size. It can also mean diverse, but not exclusively. And we did not pursue an emerging manager program, as others have. Kellogg Foundation is a case study you might want to read. But just wanted to make that specific, that our belief was that if the managers are qualified, they should have a shot at the whole business, not just a segment of the business. So on the next slide lists some of the metrics that I mentioned that we ask our consultant to report on, and that we ourselves hold ourselves accountable to be transparent and report on. And so I'll go through some of the results over the last couple of years of those metrics in the next slide, please. So one of the key measures, and this is looking at our investment consultant, is the number of meetings that they've had and the proportion of those meetings that are with diverse managers. And as you can see in this chart, started out in 2013 at 43, went up 69. Last year we were at 59. We think that spike and coming back down, or Colonial tells us that they think that's because there was such a push in the media and focus on this, that there was a big bump in introductions, and now it's kind of more normalizing. However, last year in 2015, 18% of all their first-time meetings with new managers that they haven't previously met with were diverse managers. On the next slide, so you can see there that we definitely widened the funnel, the top of the funnel in sourcing. Now moving down the funnel, how many of those managers were recommended across their client base? And here you can see steady growth as well, with 88% of the 25 managers were actually hired by their clients. And you can also see in the pie chart that the representation of those managers across gender and ethnicity was diverse as well. On next slide, and probably more important from a manager's perspective, is the assets deployed to those managers. So when we started measuring this a couple of years ago at 150 million across Colonial's client base, now up to 700 million, a pretty significant increase over a 2-year period of time. And now the next slide is looking at us, at the Community Foundation, and our progress within our own portfolios. And you can see year by year the number of managers has increased from 3 to 6 to 8, and we're currently still at 8. In 2016, we dropped 1 and added 1. You can see that those assets are spread across a variety of asset classes, all of them: fixed income, equities, U.S., international, cash, private assets, hedge funds. And that the increase in assets deployed to those managers has increased significantly as well. And we're currently at $118 million. We let go of our cash deposits, a bank relationship. I'm going to turn it over to Elaine now to talk more about her experience and our experience with the managers at Colonial.
Good afternoon, everyone. If we could move to the next slide, that'll give you a snapshot of the managers currently in our roster. Includes also some managers that are at the 50% level, but really the sense we wanted to share is that, again, it's across multiple asset classes. Just briefly, so my experience coming into the foundation a couple of years ago, I was very fortunate because it was just a few months after the article had been published. My background, I've had 20-something years of portfolio management, institutional asset management with BGI BlackRock and Citibank, and as a Hong Kong-born Canadian female in the business, certainly it's evident everywhere I turn that it is a dominated industry and that requires change. And in fact, one of our board members, who's a member of the National Venture Capital Association Diversity Task Force, is often saying that, you know, our diversity in tech, particularly in VC, is second only to the Catholic bishops. And so we've been proudly saying things like, we're coming out as women for a change. We're coming out. We want to have more dialogue. And so my role here at SVCF, we could forward the slide, is to collaborate with Colonial in trying to expand the funnel of managers that we engage with. So I know folks in the audience were indicating that they would like to find more quality managers. And as earlier referenced, I think making sure that, one, you basically publicly put out the sign, be it on your website or in your engagement with both your existing managers, your consultant committee staff. You leverage every network to be inviting this type of engagement, and then trying to manage, structuring a reasonable process with some parameters around it that lets you sift through what will surely be, I think, a relatively abundant course of submissions from various managers. So we've been doing that primarily in specific asset classes, sometimes working with our consultant, but very much just receiving references through our networks, again, leveraging those associations. And one of the first things I was very proud of in coming on to SVCF is that we also looked at our minority women-owned broker-dealer relationship and brought a manager on in that space as well. So really think just beyond every type of service. So, you know, we've also queried other peer asset owners in the space when we're at conferences or even one-on-one meetings, and we're encouraging through informal and formal coaching sessions about how to take action, how to assess, discuss, and commit. And I will say, even just last week, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, one of the largest sovereign managers around, actually also acknowledged that they are not aggregating the data. They're not aggregating the type of manager meetings that they're taking, and they would believe, with further analysis, that there is alpha to be had, and I think that that's where our intuitive set would lie. So I'll stop there and transition to Jason, as I know. Oh, sorry, next page, sorry. Around taking action is really, I just encourage you to go to our website and sign on to the pledge. And feel free to sort of submit questions through the Council of Foundations or ADFI, and we'll find a way to get more resources into your hands. So with that, Jason?
Jason, are you still there?
Hi guys, sorry about that. I was fumbling around with the mute button, so forgive me. Thank you, Elaine, and thank you to the Council of Foundations and APFI and Bert and Elaine, who have been leaders in this space, for putting together this what so far has just been great. And thank you to all of the attendees. So I'm going to be very brief in my comments because I want to make sure, I want to be mindful of time. I want to make sure that there's time for questions, as I've been told by Stephanie. So let me, if we'll just go to the next slide, I'll keep my comments very short. So as Erica mentioned, we're writing a white paper now, and in fact, we're very close to concluding all of our interviews with some foundations who we think are thought leaders in this space, and some that are just very active and sometimes quietly so in the space, and others who haven't been as active but are very mindful of the issues that have been raised on this call and want to be to participate in some way. So I think it's interesting, and I'll just comment that when we started this work, we originally thought we would pull together 4 or 5, maybe 6 foundations to really, put together this study, and our intention was to put together an instructional roadmap. So, as the polling suggests for this call, a lot of you are contemplating engaging diverse asset managers. Well, when you make the decision to do that, how do you actually do it? When you walk into the office on Monday morning, what are the steps you take? Who are the counterparties in the industry that you can rely on? And so our paper is really meant to be an instructional roadmap to help you think through those things. And we thought we could get 5 or 6 foundations to help us think about that together. And I'm happy to say, as you can see from the slide here, as a result of some folks like Bert and Elaine letting other folks know that that we're writing this paper, and APFI certainly commissioning the paper. We're now probably going to get 16 to 18 foundations who have contributed to the work. And that contribution has come from all levels, senior investment officers certainly, but we've had people on the program side that have had something to add to the discussion, which has been very fascinating. We've had CEOs and presidents, trustees, and CIOs, of course. So we've got hours and hours of content, and within the next couple of weeks, we're really going to be sort of going through all that content, which ends up telling, some themes will rise to the top. But I want to share a few of those things that we're pulling together right now as we speak. And so I want to be careful not to front run the end of our research, or my team will kill me. But I do want to share some things that we are finding. Some of them aren't terribly surprising, and they're certainly not different from what we found in our work in the public pension space that we did a couple of years ago. But one thing, and I'll sort of go right down to the third bullet point toward the bottom of the slide here, collaboration. I think this is going to be a very, very big and central piece, a part to our work. One, there is if you go back and when this is all over and look at Elaine's slides, there is a natural intrinsic motivation in the foundation space to collaborate with other foundations, and that's going to be a very big. I think it's going to be a central piece to our work, and figuring out more efficient ways to collaborate, and who to collaborate with, and how to think about it in general. But the benefits to doing that are pretty significant. So I think collaboration is going to be a very, very important part of our work. I think we've sort of mentioned this before. There are some differences in the foundation space. If you think about how in the public space, the public pension plans, you've got the pension plans that have been most active in engaging with diverse or emerging managers, as they might call them, have been in the states, not surprisingly, where there's been a significant shift in the demographic makeup of the state. California, Texas, New York, Illinois. And if you really just look at those states alone, what you find is there are significant assets allocated or earmarked for investment with emerging managers. And therefore, when we've got probably 1,000 asset managers in our database, and probably half of those would qualify as emerging in some definition, as we know that there are many definitions. But if you look at the ones that qualify as emerging, when we plot them on a map, not surprisingly, they've clustered around where the capital is for these emerging manager programs. So if you look at New York Common Retirement Fund, they allocate almost $10 billion to emerging managers. So if now, it also happens to be in New York, which is the finance center of the world, but certainly those asset managers are following the capital to some degree. We're starting to see more and more managers set up shop in Texas, and then certainly we have some on the West Coast. So this clustering of the managers in these areas is great for these large pension funds, but if you're a foundation in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you're sort of out of the flow in terms of where the managers are. And what we're not sure of is if you're that foundation in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you're making a trip to New York City, are you being intentional enough about making sure that you're seeing not just the big name brand asset managers and established firms here, but are you seeing any emerging managers when you come to New York City? Because the chances are those emerging managers are probably not coming through Tulsa, Oklahoma very regularly. So this again just buttresses the idea that if you are going to get into this space, it's crucial that you actually do it and get into the space. You've got to attend the conferences. You've got to collaborate with your peers so that if you are going to Chicago, that you have a short list of managers that you can call on while you're there. So this collaboration, again, is going to be an important part in how you source and access the managers. I think one thing that's coming up is, there are different ways to be active in this space, and we want to be honest about, and some foundations in our interviews have been very honest, and some we have not spoken to, but we suspect have the same sort of approach, and how likely we're going, it is that we're going to see, a tremendous amount of diversity in the asset managers in their portfolio. But that doesn't always mean that they can't be active in this space and they can't contribute to more visibility for the managers. And so, because of the grant-making side of a foundation, there are more ways, I think, to contribute to the overall, diversity and inclusion conversation. Elaine brings up a great point when you start looking at not just your asset managers, but your other vendors, your broker-dealers, maybe your consultants. There are a number of different ways to be active in this space, or just simply asking very, very clear questions of your established managers. So if you're hiring Blackstone and you're always going to be hiring Blackstone, what are the things you can ask Blackstone as part of your quarterly reviews or annual reviews or your initial due diligence that let Blackstone know that diversity and inclusion is a priority for your organization? It doesn't have to be, if you're not hiring women and minorities, then we're not going to allocate to you. But the repeatedly asking those questions of your established managers lets them know that this is a priority for your organization. And hopefully we'll start to see some changes going down that path as well. Maybe I'll just end with, I think more can be done to bridge the mission of the overall foundation and organization with the investment division. And this is a tricky one, and as I mentioned earlier, we're still working our way through it to see really where we come out. Some organizations culturally are there, and if you're there, it's wonderful. Silicon Valley is a great example of that. Culturally, diversity and inclusion flows throughout the entire organization. In other organizations, it's not embedded into the fabric, and that's a very hard thing to organically create. It obviously starts with leadership at the board level, at the executive level, and we're finding that a very, very good way to sort of initiate the importance of this is in the hiring process. We've noticed that a few foundations, when they've needed to hire investment professionals or a CIO, when the discussion of diversity and inclusion or diverse asset managers in the portfolio came up in the hiring process, when the CIO took the job, they already understood that it was a very big priority. And so there are some things culturally that that can be done. There are some things in the investment policy that can be done to sort of make this a central part to your firm. I'm going to stop there. I had a few more things to say, but I think it's fair for us to stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you very much, Erica, Bert, Elaine, and Jason. I hope all of the participants can join me in offering a virtual hand clap to all of our speakers for sharing their knowledge with us. We are at 2:56 right now. We want to respect your time. There are several questions that have been submitted, but what we want to do, if it's okay with everyone on the phone, is we will take the questions that we have and provide responses to those questions, and when we send the slide deck and the recording to the webinar, we'll include answers to those questions. For example, someone wanted to know how has having diverse asset management as an organizational priority affected your relationship with your external investment manager partner? If you have any questions that you haven't posted so far, please do so now, or you can also email me at the council and webinars@cof.org, and that way we can make sure that your question is in the queue. To continue the learning on diverse asset managers and other topics, the Council, with the generous support from our education partner, the TIAA Institute, is hosting our 2016 Endowments and Finance Summit September 28th through 30th in New York. Participants at the summit can expect to hear thought leader plenary sessions. We'll have 12 concurrent sessions, learning labs, and most importantly, peer networking opportunities on critical operational and strategic issues such as asset allocation, investment and spending policy development, managing the relationship with your outsourced CIO, and a closing plenary session looking at the 2016 election and other policy changes that present interesting threats to endowed philanthropy. Registration for the summit is now open. You can see the URL on the slide on the screen. If you have any questions about the summit, please feel free to contact us, and we hope to see you all at the summit in September. As a reminder, a recording of the webinar, along with the slides and answers to questions, will be made available on the Council website. But when you close out of the webinar, you'll be immediately directed to an evaluation survey. And I can't say enough how much we would like your feedback on the webinar today. We can't get any better unless you let us know what you think, and to share other topics that you'd like to see us address in future webinars. Again, if you have any questions that you haven't posted so far, send them to us at webinars@cof.org, and we'll add them into the queue. This concludes our webinar for this afternoon, and thank you so much for spending some of your afternoon with us.